At the family dinner, my parents looked me right in the eye and said my younger sister deserved everything. They handed her the keys to their $1.5 million house and left me with absolutely nothing. A month later, my mother texted me demanding I pay the $8,000 mortgage on the house they just gave away. I simply replied with 7 words that destroyed their entire lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with a toxic family who completely underestimated you. My name is Olivia, and I am 34 years old. I work as a forensic accountant for a major corporate firm in Chicago. My entire career is built on tracking down financial fraud, following the money, and finding the hidden truths in bank statements. But the biggest financial scam I ever had to unravel was not in a corporate boardroom. It was sitting right across from me at my own family Thanksgiving dinner table. The dining room of my parents' sprawling house in the Chicago suburbs smelled like roasted turkey and expensive sage, but the atmosphere in the room was suffocating. My father, Richard, tapped his crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon until the room fell completely silent. My mother, Brenda, sat beside him, wearing that familiar smug smile she always put on whenever she was about to do something incredibly cruel and mask it as family loyalty. "Everyone, I have a major announcement," my father said, puffing out his chest with pride. "Your mother and I have just finalized some very important legal paperwork. We are officially using a quitclaim deed to sign over this entire estate fully and completely to Amanda and Jamal." I froze with my wine glass halfway to my mouth. Amanda, my 31-year-old sister, shrieked with absolute joy and threw her arms around her husband. Jamal, my African-American brother-in-law, flashed his perfectly bleached teeth and gave my father a smooth, practiced nod. "We really appreciate it, Richard," he said in that overly confident tone of his. "We are really building that generational wealth, you know." I slowly set my glass down on the table. "You are signing over the deed?" I asked, my voice cutting through the celebration. "What about the mortgage? You still owe over $1 million on this house." My mother rolled her eyes, her tone dripping with that condescending patience she reserved only for me. "Oh, Olivia, stop being so dramatic," she snapped. "We are keeping the mortgage in our name to protect their credit, but the house belongs to them now. It is the right thing to do." "The right thing to do," I repeated, trying to keep my anger in check. "I helped pay the down payment on this house 5 years ago. You both promised me it would be split evenly in the estate." "Well, plans change," my mother fired back, dropping her sweet facade. "Look at you, Olivia. You are 34, single, and obsessed with your spreadsheets. You sit in a downtown condo all day. What do you need a 4-bedroom house for? Amanda is trying to build a family, and Jamal's artificial intelligence tech startup is right on the verge of explosive seed funding. They need a solid foundation right now. They deserve it." There it was, the summary of my entire existence in this family. I was the workhorse, the invisible safety net who bailed them out of trouble. Amanda was the golden child who never held a job for more than 6 months but was somehow always exhausted. And Jamal was a walking red flag. He was a guy who used buzzwords like crypto and seed funding to hide the fact that he had not earned a legitimate paycheck in 3 solid years. Jamal leaned across the table, his expensive watch catching the light from the chandelier. "No disrespect to you, Olivia, but you are just an employee. You clock in and you clock out. You do not understand how real wealth creation works. Amanda and I are building an empire, and this house is just the headquarters." I did not scream, and I did not cry. 12 years in corporate accounting had taught me one very important lesson. Numbers never lie, but people always do. And arrogant people always make fatal mistakes. I stood up calmly, folded my linen napkin, and placed it on the table. "Congratulations on your new empire, Jamal," I said, looking right at him. "Just a heads up, Dad transferring a deed while maintaining a mortgage is a very tricky legal gray area. I hope you read the fine print." My father scoffed loudly. "My lawyer knows more than some glorified human calculator," he sneered. "You are just bitter, Olivia. You always have been." I walked out the front door into the freezing November air without looking back. I assumed that was the end of it and that I would just cut them off and move on with my quiet life. I was completely wrong because the real nightmare had not even started yet. Listen to me, Olivia. You need to expand your mindset. Jamal leaned back in his expensive leather dining chair, swirling his champagne with a look of absolute pity on his face. You are stuck in the rat race. You look at numbers on a screen all day for somebody else's company. I am disrupting the market. My new artificial intelligence platform is going to revolutionize decentralized finance. We are talking smart contracts and full Web3 integration. Investors are practically begging to throw capital at me. This house is just the beginning. We need a solid asset portfolio to show the venture capitalists that we are serious players. I stared at him in disbelief. A man who had asked my father to pay his car insurance just 6 months ago was now lecturing me about asset portfolios. You do not get it because you are programmed to be a wage slave. Jamal continued, his voice oozing with unearned confidence. No offense to you, but a standard salary is just the matrix keeping you broke. Amanda and I are building generational wealth. We need this property to leverage for our next funding round. You should be happy for us. You should be supporting the family vision instead of acting like a jealous spectator. Amanda nodded vigorously, resting a hand on her perfectly flat stomach. Exactly. Jamal is under so much pressure right now, Olivia. The baby is coming and we need stability. You have your little apartment and your little job. Why can you not just be happy that mom and dad are finally giving me the security I deserve? You always have to make everything about you. I looked at my mother and father. They were nodding along with every absurd word coming out of Jamal and Amanda's mouths. My father was looking at Jamal like he was the next billionaire tech genius, instead of a 33-year-old man who spent his days trading volatile meme coins on his phone. My mother was glaring at me silently, daring me to ruin her perfect holiday dinner. The urge to scream was overwhelming. The urge to flip the table and remind them that I was the one who handed them $50,000 out of my own savings for the down payment on this exact house 5 years ago burned in my throat. But I am a forensic accountant. I deal with high-stakes financial fraud and corporate liars every single day. I know that when dealing with arrogant narcissists, the worst thing you can do is show them your emotions. I reached for my linen napkin and calmly wiped the corner of my mouth. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. The sound of the wood scraping against the dining room floor echoed in the sudden heavy silence. I am not jealous, Amanda, I said, keeping my voice completely level. And Jamal, I sincerely wish you the best of luck with your decentralized finance revolution. But I strongly suggest you both hire a real estate attorney tomorrow morning. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. We already have a lawyer, Olivia. He drew up the quitclaim deed yesterday. It is a done deal. A quitclaim deed transfers ownership, Dad, I replied, looking down at him. It does not transfer the mortgage debt. The bank still holds the lien on this property, and almost every single mortgage in the United States has a specific clause buried in the fine print. If you transfer the deed to a new owner without getting the lender's explicit written permission first, it triggers an immediate default. The bank can legally demand the entire balance of the loan paid in full within 30 days. Jamal scoffed loudly, crossing his arms and shaking his head. You do not know what you are talking about. You are just a bitter bean counter trying to scare us because you did not get your way. Maybe, I said, grabbing my wool coat from the back of the chair. But when you play stupid games with a $1.5 million asset, you usually win very stupid prizes. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everyone. As I walked down the hallway toward the front door, the dining room erupted into loud laughter. I heard my mother say she is so bitter, it is honestly pathetic. My father chuckled and agreed, saying I was just trying to ruin their celebration because no man wanted to marry me. Their cruel, mocking laughter followed me all the way out into the freezing November night. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away from the only family I had ever known. For the next 4 weeks, I threw myself completely into my corporate fraud cases. I ignored the passive-aggressive family group chats. I blocked Amanda's social media accounts so I would not have to see her staging fake pregnancy photos for sympathy. I assumed I had successfully cut the toxic cord. I believed the worst was over and that they would finally leave me alone. I could not have been more wrong. Exactly 1 month later, on a quiet Tuesday evening, I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing a case file. My phone lit up with a text message. It was from my mother. I stared at the screen and felt the blood completely drain from my face. The text read, "The $8,000 house payment is due tomorrow. I emailed you the link to the payment portal. Be a good sister and cover it." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, letting the sheer audacity of my mother's words wash over me. "The $8,000 house payment is due tomorrow. Be a good sister and cover it." For a moment, I actually laughed out loud. It was a hollow, bitter sound that bounced off the quiet walls of my kitchen. They had literally handed over a $1.5 million asset to my sister just 4 weeks ago. They had mocked my career, my relationship status, and my entire life at the Thanksgiving table. And now they expected me to open my wallet and finance their delusion. I did not hesitate. I did not type out a long, emotional paragraph explaining how hurt I was. I tapped the screen and typed a simple, factual response. Amanda's house. Jamal's startup money. Let them pay. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the granite counter. It did not even take 10 seconds. The phone began to vibrate violently across the counter. The caller identification flashed with my mother's name. I took a deep breath, pressed accept, and put it on speakerphone. "How dare you speak to me that way?" My mother screamed the second the line connected. Her voice was so shrill it made the speaker crackle. "I am your mother, Olivia. I carried you for 9 months. You will not disrespect me, and you will certainly not disrespect your sister." "I am not disrespecting anyone, Mom," I replied, my voice completely flat. "I am stating a financial fact. You gave Amanda the deed. It is her property. Jamal is allegedly on the verge of explosive seed funding for his artificial intelligence empire. Why on earth would I pay the mortgage on a house I do not own?" "Because you are family," my mother yelled. "And family helps each other when things get a little tight. You have thousands of dollars just sitting in your savings account doing absolutely nothing. You are single. You do not have childcare expenses. You are just hoarding your money out of pure selfishness while your pregnant sister is stressed out of her mind." "Things are tight," I repeated, catching the slip-up immediately. "Why are things tight, Mom? Did Jamal's imaginary investors pull out?" My mother hesitated for a fraction of a second. "It is none of your business," she snapped defensively. "But if you must know, Jamal had to make a strategic business purchase last week. He needs to project a certain image to attract high-level venture capitalists. He bought a Porsche. It is a business investment, Olivia. You would not understand because you do not know how networking at that level works." I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. A Porsche? You want me to pay your $8,000 mortgage because your unemployed son-in-law bought a luxury sports car to impress imaginary investors? Do you hear yourself right now? "Do not you dare talk down to me," my mother snarled, her tone turning vicious. "Listen to me very carefully, Olivia. You are going to log into that portal and you are going to pay that bill right now. If you do not, I swear to God I will call Aunt Carol, Uncle George, and the rest of the family. I will tell them exactly what kind of heartless, greedy person you really are. I will tell them you are trying to force your pregnant sister out onto the street on Christmas Eve just because you are jealous of her happiness. You will be dead to this family. You will have no one." The threat hung in the heavy air. For 34 years, the fear of being isolated from the family had kept me in line. It had kept me writing checks, co-signing small loans, and swallowing my pride to keep the peace. But listening to her defend a man who bought a Porsche while begging for mortgage money finally broke the spell. "Tell them whatever you want, Mom," I said coldly. "Tell the whole world. But do not ever contact me for money again." I reached out and ended the call. The kitchen went dead silent. I stood there for a long time just listening to the hum of my refrigerator. I had done it. I had finally drawn the line and cut them off completely. But as the adrenaline slowly faded, my professional instincts began to kick in. Something was seriously wrong. I am a forensic accountant and my brain is wired to look for discrepancies. The math simply did not add up. Jamal had terrible credit. I knew this because he had begged my father to co-sign a car loan for a basic sedan 3 years ago. If Jamal had terrible credit and no verifiable income, how did he just finance a brand new Porsche? Car dealerships do not care about artificial intelligence buzzwords. They care about credit scores and down payments. Where did he get the cash? And why was my mother suddenly so desperate for $8,000 that she was willing to call the daughter she despised and beg for it? A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I walked over to my laptop and flipped it open. I did not know it yet, but I was about to discover a betrayal so deep it would permanently destroy my family. The next morning, I was sitting at my sleek glass desk on the 42nd floor of my corporate accounting firm. The Chicago skyline outside my window was completely obscured by a heavy gray winter fog, which matched my mood perfectly. I had 3 major corporate fraud audits open on my dual monitors, but I could not focus. My mind kept drifting back to the phone call with my mother the night before. The numbers were still spinning relentlessly in my head. A brand new luxury Porsche costs at least $130,000. Even with a substantial down payment, the monthly installments would be astronomical. Jamal had zero verifiable income. Amanda had not worked a single day since she got married. My parents lived entirely off my father's modest pension and the rapidly dwindling returns from his retirement portfolio. None of them had the liquid assets or the financial history required to secure a luxury vehicle loan. So where exactly did the money come from? I took a sip of my bitter black coffee, trying to force myself to focus on the complex spreadsheet in front of me. Suddenly, my personal cell phone buzzed violently against the glass desktop. I glanced down. It was an automated text message from my primary bank. It was a fraud monitoring alert. As a forensic accountant, I take my personal financial security incredibly seriously. I have active monitoring on all my accounts at all times. Usually these alerts are triggered by something completely trivial, like buying a coffee in a different state or a software subscription renewal hitting my account at an unusual hour. But the message flashing on my phone screen made my breath catch sharply in my throat. It read, "Urgent credit profile change detected, login required immediately." I pushed my corporate case files aside and quickly opened a new secure browser window on my computer. My fingers were actually trembling as I typed in the web address for Experian. I have spent my entire adult life meticulously building and protecting my credit. In my specific line of work, a flawless financial background is literally a strict job requirement. My score had sat at a perfect 800 for the last 4 consecutive years. It was my absolute armor. It was the undeniable proof that I was nothing like my financially reckless, chaotic family. I entered my complex password and answered the 2-factor authentication prompt. The dashboard seemed to load with a slow, agonizing crawl. When the screen finally populated, the air was instantly sucked right out of my lungs. The bright green circle that usually displayed my perfect 800 score was completely gone. In its place was an angry, glowing red ring. Inside that dark red ring was the number 520. 520. That is not just a mildly bad credit score. That is the credit score of someone who has completely defaulted on their entire life. That is a devastating score that prevents you from renting a basic apartment, buying a reliable car, or in my highly regulated industry, keeping your corporate security clearance. I gripped the cold edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned completely white. I clicked on the detailed report tab, praying with everything I had that it was just a massive system error or a simple data glitch. The detailed breakdown of my financial accounts filled the screen. My student loans were fully paid off. My personal credit cards had zero balances. My vehicle was fully owned. Everything looked perfectly normal until I scrolled down to the open liabilities section. There, sitting right at the top of the list, was a massive account I had never seen before in my entire life. It was a home equity line of credit, a HELOC. It had been officially opened exactly 6 months ago. The originating lender was First National Bank, and the total amount drawn against this line of credit was an absolutely staggering $400,000. I stared at the screen, feeling entirely numb from head to toe. A home equity line of credit requires physical collateral. It requires a house. The only property associated with my name anywhere in the country was my parents' $1.5 million home in the suburbs. 5 years ago, I had foolishly allowed them to put my name on the original paperwork as a cosigner, just to help them secure a lower interest rate. The brutal realization hit me like a physical punch to the chest, knocking the wind out of me. 6 months ago, my parents had secretly taken out a massive loan against the equity of their house. But because my father had completely ruined his own credit over the years, they could not get approved on their own. So they used my name. They used my social security number. They committed federal identity theft to hand $400,000 in cash to Jamal. And now, because they just gave the deed of the house to Amanda, they were trying to stick me with the $8,000 monthly bill for the rest of my life. I took a deep breath and forced my panic down into a tight box. Panic is useless in my profession. Data is everything. I clicked on the creditor link provided by the credit bureau and navigated straight to the First National Bank secure portal. Because my social security number was attached to the fraudulent account, I was able to verify my identity and request an immediate download of the master loan agreement. The 60-page digital document downloaded in less than 5 seconds. I opened the file and scrolled past the endless pages of standard banking disclosures straight to the final signature block. There it was. My name was printed clearly in bold black letters on the borrower line. Below it was a digital signature and a scanned copy of a physical signature. I leaned closer to the monitor. The physical signature was a decent forgery, but to a trained eye it was incredibly sloppy. The loop on the letter L was entirely too wide, and the angle of the V leaned heavily to the left. It was my mother's handwriting. She had tried to mimic the way I signed my name on the annual holiday cards I used to send them. But a forged signature alone does not secure a $400,000 home equity line of credit. You need verifiable identification. You need a social security number. A cold wave of nausea washed over me as the realization clicked into place. 12 years ago, when I was applying for an emergency college tuition loan, my father had insisted on helping me organize the paperwork. He had asked for my original social security card and my birth certificate to make photocopies for the bank. He had kept those copies in the locked metal filing cabinet in his home office, claiming it was for safekeeping. They had kept my identity neatly filed away for over a decade, just waiting for the perfect moment to exploit it. They had weaponized my own personal information to secure a massive cash payout for a man who openly mocked my career. I did not just stop at the signature page. I am a forensic accountant, and I know that every digital transaction leaves a permanent footprint. I scrolled down to the very last page of the document, which contained the digital certificate of completion. Every time a legal document is signed electronically, the software generates an undeniable audit trail. It records the exact time the document was opened, the device used, and most importantly, the Internet Protocol address of the user. I highlighted the string of numbers listed under the IP address section and pasted it into a network tracking tool I frequently use for corporate investigations. I hit enter and watched the screen load. I did not need the exact street address to know the truth, but the tracking software gave it to me anyway. The internet service provider was Comcast. The geolocation pin dropped directly onto the affluent suburban neighborhood where I had grown up. The IP address matched my parents' home network perfectly. I looked at the timestamp on the digital certificate. The document had been officially executed at 10:15 in the morning on a Tuesday 6 months ago. I quickly pulled up my own corporate timesheet from that exact date. At 10:15 on that specific Tuesday morning, I was sitting in a secure glass conference room downtown, giving a presentation to a board of directors. My corporate badge logs proved I was inside a highly monitored building miles away from my parents' house. The evidence was absolute. It was airtight and indisputable. My parents had not just made a poor financial decision, they had conspired to commit federal wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. They had knowingly defrauded First National Bank to pull $400,000 in cash out of the house. Then they had legally transferred the deed to my sister Amanda, so that when the massive loan eventually defaulted, the bank could not come after her. The bank would come after the person listed on the loan documents. They would come after me. My parents had constructed a perfectly insulated legal bubble for their golden child and her husband. They had built their entire generational wealth strategy by throwing me directly onto the financial train tracks. I closed the loan document and sat back in my ergonomic desk chair. The shock was entirely gone now. It was completely replaced by a freezing, calculating clarity. They thought I was just a bitter, jealous spectator who would quietly pay the bills to keep the peace. They thought they could outsmart a woman whose entire career was dedicated to dismantling complex financial crimes. They were about to learn exactly why I am the best at what I do. I closed the loan document and immediately opened a new secure tab. Knowing that my parents committed identity theft was only the first half of the equation. I needed to know exactly where my stolen $400,000 went. If you want to trap a financial criminal, you do not just look at the origin of the theft, you follow the money. Jamal had practically shoved the name of his fake company down my throat at Thanksgiving. Next Gen Artificial Intelligence Solutions, Limited Liability Company. I logged into the Illinois Secretary of State Business database and pulled the public registration records. Jamal was listed as the sole managing member. The company had been officially registered just 2 weeks before my parents forged my signature on the home equity line of credit. The timing was not a coincidence. It was a calculated, premeditated extraction of wealth. Because the fraudulent loan was legally tied to my Social Security number, I had the full authority to track the disbursement of those funds. I contacted the fraud division at First National Bank. I provided my corporate credentials and filed an immediate identity theft claim. The fraud investigator on duty was more than happy to assist a fellow financial professional. Within 2 hours, he sent me the wire transfer logs associated with the fraudulent home equity account. The entire $400,000 had been transferred in one massive lump sum directly into the business checking account of Jamal's newly formed company. From there, the money began to bleed out at an astonishing rate. Using my firm's specialized financial tracking software, I initiated a trace on the outbound routing numbers. If Jamal was truly building an artificial intelligence empire, I would expect to see massive payments to software developers, server hosting facilities, and marketing agencies. Instead, the public ledger and the corresponding wire endpoints painted the picture of a man who was living out a pathetic fantasy. The very first transaction occurred just 3 days after the money landed in his account. It was a wire transfer for $135,000 to a luxury auto broker in downtown Chicago. There was the Porsche my mother had so proudly defended. He did not finance it. He bought it outright using cash stolen from my name. But that was just the beginning. I scrolled down the chronological list of expenditures. There were charges for $30,000 at a high-end jewelry store. There were massive withdrawals at casino resorts in Las Vegas. There were tens of thousands of dollars spent on first-class flights, luxury rental properties in Cabo San Lucas, and VIP tables at exclusive nightclubs. In less than 6 months, Jamal had aggressively burned through more than $200,000 of my stolen equity. Then I noticed a distinct pattern that made me stop completely. Hidden among the flashy purchases were recurring wire transfers. Every other Friday, exactly $5,000 was quietly wired out of the business account. The memo lines were always left completely blank. I isolated the routing number for those specific transfers and ran a reverse lookup through our banking database. The receiving account did not belong to a software vendor or a corporate landlord. It belonged to a personal checking account at a small credit union in Florida. The account holder was a 22-year-old woman named Destiny living in Miami. I opened another browser window and typed her name and location into a series of social media search engines. It took me less than 5 minutes to locate her public profile. Her page was a constant stream of luxury lifestyle photos. She was posing on private yachts, drinking expensive champagne, and showing off designer handbags. I began scrolling through her recent posts, clicking on every photo to examine the details. Then I found it. A picture posted exactly 3 weeks ago. Destiny was posing in front of a massive mirror in the lobby of a luxury hotel in Miami. But she was not the only person in the picture. Caught perfectly in the reflection of the glass standing just behind her and holding the camera was Jamal. I leaned back in my chair and let out a sharp breath. My sister Amanda had spent her entire life acting superior and demanding to be treated like royalty. She had happily accepted a stolen $1.5 million house and was parading around pretending everything was perfect. Meanwhile, her husband was systematically draining my stolen credit to fund a secret double life with an internet model thousands of miles away. My parents had risked federal prison to finance this spectacular betrayal. They had traded my financial security to buy their golden child a fake life that was already rotting from the inside out. I looked at the undeniable proof staring back at me from the monitors. I did not just have enough evidence to clear my name. I had enough evidence to burn their entire fake world straight to the ground. I gathered all the printed wire transfer logs, the IP address tracking data, and the high-resolution screenshots of Jamal and his Miami girlfriend. I placed them neatly into a thick red legal folder on my desk, smoothing my hand over the cover. I was just about to dial the direct line for my contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation when the intercom on my desk buzzed sharply. It was the receptionist down in the main lobby of our corporate headquarters. She sounded frantic and apologetic. "Olivia, I am so incredibly sorry to bother you during your audit hours, but your sister is down here. She is extremely upset and she is making quite a scene. We asked her to lower her voice, but she refuses to leave until she speaks with you directly." I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. I stood up, smoothed out the wrinkles in my tailored pencil skirt, and took the private executive elevator down to the ground floor. The moment the polished steel doors slid open, the sound of loud dramatic sobbing echoed aggressively across the massive marble lobby. There was Amanda. She was sitting right in the center of one of the expensive leather visitor couches, clutching her stomach and weeping loudly. Several of my colleagues and a few high-level corporate executives were walking past, casting concerned and highly uncomfortable glances in her direction. Amanda was always an absolute master of public manipulation. Since we were children, she knew exactly how to weaponize her tears to make the other person look like an abusive monster. I walked over to her, keeping my posture rigid and my expression completely blank. "Amanda, what are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice low and strictly professional. She looked up at me, her eyes perfectly red and well-rehearsed tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Olivia, thank God," she cried out, intentionally, raising her volume so the passing executives could clearly hear her. "Mom and Dad are just so stressed out right now. I am so stressed out. My doctor said the baby is in severe distress because of all this terrible family fighting. Why are you doing this to us?" I glanced at the security guard standing near the front desk, who was watching the exchange nervously with his hand resting near his radio. "I am not doing anything to you, Amanda," I replied coldly, refusing to take the bait. "Mom and Dad committed federal identity theft. They stole $400,000 in my name." Amanda abruptly stopped crying for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting around frantically to see if anyone had heard my accusation. Then she launched right back into her theatrical performance. It is just a massive misunderstanding, she wailed, digging aggressively into her expensive designer purse. You know Dad is not good with financial paperwork. They just wanted to help Jamal launch his tech business so we could finally have some real security. You are making a huge deal out of nothing. You are trying to put our parents in federal prison over a simple clerical mistake. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of her bag and shoved it toward my chest. Just sign this, she demanded, her voice suddenly losing its tearful edge and dropping into a sharp, bossy tone. It is a debt assumption agreement. My lawyer drafted it this morning. If you sign it, you are legally acknowledging that the home equity line of credit is yours, and that you authorize the funds being used for Jamal's business. It clears Mom and Dad of any fraud charges, and the bank will leave them alone. I looked down at the piece of paper she was holding. I could not believe the sheer staggering audacity of it. They really thought I was weak enough to willingly chain myself to nearly $500,000 of debt just to stop a public temper tantrum. They genuinely believed that the threat of public embarrassment in my professional workplace would force me into total surrender. Amanda thrust a blue pen toward me. Just sign it, Olivia. You make plenty of money here. You can easily afford the monthly payments. If you do not sign this, the stress might make me lose the baby. Do you really want the loss of your niece or nephew on your conscience? I looked at my sister. I thought about the wire transfers I had just reviewed upstairs. I thought about the luxury hotel in Miami, the expensive sports car, and the 22-year-old girl named Destiny. I knew exactly where my stolen money was going, but I was not going to give Amanda the satisfaction of a screaming match in the middle of my corporate lobby. The truth was going to drop like a bomb, but it would happen entirely on my terms. I did not take the pen. I did not even look at the paper again. I simply raised my hand and signaled the head of building security. Frank. I called out, my voice ringing clearly across the marble floor. This woman is trespassing and actively harassing a corporate employee. Please escort her off the premises immediately. If she resists, call the Chicago police. Amanda's jaw dropped open in absolute shock. What? She gasped, scrambling to her feet as two large security guards quickly approached us. You cannot do this to me. I am your pregnant sister. You are a cold, heartless monster, Olivia. Ma'am, you need to leave the building right now, the security guard said firmly, placing a heavy hand on her elbow. Amanda tried to violently shake him off her face, turning bright red with genuine unscripted rage now. You are going to regret this, Olivia, she screamed wildly as the guards began to physically walk her toward the revolving glass doors. You are tearing this family apart over nothing. I stood perfectly still, watching them drag her out onto the freezing downtown sidewalk. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I turned around and walked calmly back to the elevators. I had a meeting to schedule and a devastating trap to set. I returned to my desk and stared out at the gray Chicago skyline. My phone began to ring exactly 10 minutes after Amanda was thrown out of the building. It was my father. I answered it on the fourth ring. He was furious and immediately started shouting, but I cut him off before he could gain any momentum. I told him that if they wanted to resolve this situation, they could meet me at a crowded coffee shop 3 blocks from my office at noon. I chose a busy public place intentionally. Toxic people absolutely hate an audience when they are trying to manipulate you. I arrived 10 minutes early and secured a small table in the center of the room, surrounded by people typing on their laptops and drinking lattes. Right at noon, my parents walked through the heavy glass doors with Jamal trailing closely behind them. Amanda was noticeably absent, probably resting her fake baby bump after her disastrous morning performance. My mother looked entirely exhausted, playing the role of the heavily burdened matriarch to absolute perfection. She slammed her expensive leather purse onto the table and glared at me. I cannot believe you had armed guards lay their hands on your pregnant sister. My mother hissed, keeping her voice low but filled with venom. She is at home right now, completely traumatized. Her blood pressure is through the roof, all because you wanted to play the corporate tough girl. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. Let us skip the theatrics, Mom, I said calmly. We are not here to talk about Amanda's fake tears. We are here to talk about the $400,000 home equity line of credit you opened using my social security number. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing around the busy cafe to make sure no one at the neighboring tables was listening. "Keep your voice down, Olivia," he muttered, leaning forward. It was a temporary solution. We were always going to pay it back once Jamal's business took off. We just needed a bridge loan to get the company through the initial development phase, and your credit was perfect. We are family. Family shares resources when times are tough. Stealing my identity is not sharing resources, Dad. I replied, my tone completely flat and unwavering. It is federal bank fraud. That is when Jamal decided to take over the conversation. He dropped the slick, polished tech entrepreneur act completely. His posture became rigid and overtly aggressive. He rested his arms heavily on the small cafe table, crowding my personal space and trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "Listen to me very carefully," Olivia, Jamal said, his voice dropping to a harsh, threatening whisper. "You can sit here and throw around big, scary legal terms all you want. But let us look at the actual reality of the situation right now. Your parents made a desperate choice to help their family succeed. If you go to the police or the bank with this information, you are not just getting your money back. You are sending your own mother and father to federal prison for a very long time." My mother let out a practiced dramatic sob and pressed a napkin to her eyes right on cue. "Do you really want to be the person who destroys this family?" Jamal pressed harder, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute arrogance. "Do you really want to be the villain who jailed her own mother just to save a few bucks? Think about how that looks. Think about what Aunt Carol, Uncle George, and the rest of the family will say when they find out you put your elderly parents in handcuffs because you were too cheap and bitter to help your pregnant sister out." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a look of total victory on his face. He actually thought he had me cornered. He thought the heavy guilt of tearing the family apart would crush my resolve. He thought I would calculate the social cost of destroying my parents' lives and simply fold. "Just pay the $8,000 a month," Jamal demanded smoothly, acting as if he was offering me a generous compromise. "You make more than enough at that fancy corporate job of yours. $8,000 a month is nothing to you. Consider it an investment in your family. You pay the monthly premium, and we all walk away from this happy. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody gets publicly embarrassed. We keep this completely between us, and you get to be the hero who kept the family together." I looked at the three of them sitting across from me. My father looking away in cowardice. My mother hiding behind a napkin pretending to be a helpless victim. And my brother-in-law, a man who had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund a secret luxury life in Miami, with a 22-year-old girl lecturing me about family loyalty. It was the most pathetic display of human manipulation I had ever witnessed in my entire career. They wanted to box me in. They wanted to force me into a psychological corner where my only options were to either pay their massive debt or become the monster who locked up her own parents. They were playing a high-stakes game of emotional blackmail, but they did not realize I had already rewritten the entire rulebook. I looked at Jamal and offered him a small, chilling smile. "You make a very compelling argument, Jamal," I said softly. Jamal leaned back in his chair, looking incredibly satisfied with his little speech. He truly believed he had orchestrated the perfect psychological trap. My mother, recognizing that I had gone quiet, seized what she thought was the perfect moment of weakness. She unzipped the side pocket of her expensive designer purse, which was probably purchased with my stolen credit, and pulled out a crisp manila envelope. She opened the flap and slid a thick, stapled document across the small wooden table. It stopped right next to my coffee cup. The bold black heading at the top of the page read, "Debt Assumption and Full Release Agreement." "Amanda's lawyer drafted this up for us yesterday morning," my mother said, her voice instantly dropping its vicious edge and returning to that dripping artificial sweetness. "It is a very standard and simple contract, Olivia. It just legally states that you acknowledge the $400,000 line of credit as your own personal debt and that you hold your father and me completely harmless from any past actions. It also includes a firm clause stating that you agree to make the minimum monthly payments of $8,000 until the principal balance is paid in full. Once you sign this, we can put all this ugly family drama behind us and go back to being a happy family." My father reached into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy silver pen. He laid it gently on top of the contract. "Just do the right thing here, Olivia," he mumbled, barely able to look me in the eye. "Your sister is going through a very sensitive time right now. She needs a stress-free environment for the health of the baby. Do not make this harder than it has to be." I looked down at the thick document sitting in front of me. It was legally binding and utterly predatory. If I put my signature on that paper, I would be officially and irrevocably validating their massive financial fraud. I would be legally chaining myself to nearly $500,000 of high-interest debt while they lived rent-free in a luxury home. They wanted me to buy my way out of their emotional abuse. I reached out my hand and slowly picked up the heavy silver pen. The tense atmosphere at the small table instantly evaporated. I could visibly see the wave of immense relief wash over my parents' faces. My mother let out a long, dramatic sigh and offered me a sad, grateful smile, as if I was a stray dog finally learning how to obey. Jamal just smirked and checked his expensive luxury watch like he had somewhere much more important to be. They had won. The difficult, ungrateful daughter had finally been bullied back into her designated place as the family ATM. "You are making the right choice," Liv Jamal said confidently, leaning forward and tapping the table. "Family first. Always." "Always," I repeated softly. I clicked the top of the pen, exposing the ink. But I did not lower the pen to their ridiculous contract. Instead, I reached down into my leather corporate briefcase, resting on the floor beside my feet. I pulled out the thick red legal folder I had meticulously assembled earlier that morning in my office. I placed it squarely on top of their debt assumption agreement, effectively burying their lies under my truth. My mother's victorious smile faltered slightly. "What is that, Olivia?" she asked, her tone suddenly sharp again. "Just sign the paper so we can leave." I flipped the heavy red folder open. Inside was a thick stack of carefully organized documents. But the very first page was the only one that mattered right now. It was the official federal wire fraud reporting form from the United States Department of Justice. The fields were already completely filled out with my parents' full legal names, their home address, the exact internet protocol address they used to forge my digital signature, and the routing numbers of the stolen funds. I smoothed the crisp page down with my left hand and brought the silver pen down with my right. "What are you doing?" my father asked, his voice suddenly tightening with a sharp edge of panic. I did not answer him. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name in a smooth, deliberate stroke across the bottom authorization line. I wrote the current date right next to it. Then I closed the folder and slid it directly across the table toward Jamal. "I am signing the only document that matters today," I said, my voice slicing clearly through the ambient noise of the crowded coffee shop. "That is a completed identity theft and wire fraud report for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And right beneath it are the subpoenaed corporate bank ledgers from your completely fake artificial intelligence company, Jamal." Jamal snatched the red folder off the table, his eyes darting frantically across the official government seal printed on the top of the reporting form. "You actually thought I would not follow the money?" I asked, leaning forward so they could hear every single syllable clearly. "You thought a senior forensic accountant was just going to blindly pay an $8,000 monthly bill without auditing the accounts first? I know exactly where my $400,000 went. I know about the outright cash purchase of the Porsche. I know about the luxury casino trips to Las Vegas. And most importantly, Jamal, I know about the bi-weekly $5,000 wire transfers to a 22-year-old girl named Destiny living in Miami." Jamal's arrogant, smug expression completely disintegrated in a fraction of a second. The healthy color drained rapidly from his face, leaving him looking pale, sick, and suddenly very small. My mother gasped loudly, gripping my father's arm in absolute horror. "What are you talking about?" my mother stammered, looking frantically back and forth between my cold face and Jamal's terrified eyes. "What girl in Miami? That money was specifically for the tech startup." "There is no tech startup, Mom," I said, pushing my chair back and standing up. "He used your federal crimes to fund his luxury vacations and a secret mistress. And now, because you forged my signature to illegally give him that money, you are both officially accessories to federal money laundering. I am submitting this entire file to the federal authorities and the First National Bank Fraud Division at exactly 3 o'clock this afternoon. You have exactly 3 hours to figure out how you are going to explain this to Amanda. Have a great afternoon." I walked out of that coffee shop feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I did not wait around to see the fallout. I walked straight to the post office and sent the certified package to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Then I marched directly back to my corporate office and hand-delivered the duplicate fraud packet to my contact at First National Bank. The ticking clock had expired. The wheels of federal justice were officially in motion, and there was absolutely no turning back. I expected the next few days to be filled with chaotic phone calls. I fully expected my sister Amanda to call me screaming about Jamal's secret 22-year-old girlfriend in Miami. I expected my mother to leave hysterical voicemails begging for mercy, but my personal phone remained completely silent. The silence was unnerving, but it made perfect sense when I thought about it. Jamal was an absolute master manipulator. He had likely spun a massive web of lies to cover his tracks, probably claiming that the young woman in Miami was just an independent software contractor he hired for his tech startup. He had to keep my parents and Amanda blindly on his side because they were his only shield against federal prison. Exactly 48 hours after the coffee shop meeting, a private courier arrived at my corporate office lobby. He handed the receptionist a thick premium paper envelope addressed directly to me. I took it back to my glass desk and sliced it open with a letter opener. I was expecting a desperate apology letter or a tearful plea. What I found instead proved that my family had completely lost their grip on reality. It was a formal legal cease and desist order. The letterhead belonged to a man named Bradley Higgins. A quick internet search of his name revealed he was a sleazy bottom-feeding defense attorney who specialized in aggressive intimidation tactics and cheap out-of-court settlements. The letter was an absolute masterpiece of legal fiction. According to Mr. Higgins, my parents had never committed identity theft. The document formally claimed that I had explicitly and verbally gifted my entire credit profile and my social security number to my parents as an act of familial support. It stated that I had full prior knowledge of the $400,000 home equity line of credit and that I had enthusiastically approved of the funds being transferred to my brother-in-law to help his business. The lawyer had the staggering audacity to write that my sudden decision to report the loan as fraudulent was an act of malicious retaliation. He claimed I was simply a bitter, jealous woman trying to sabotage my pregnant sister's marriage by freezing their business capital. But the absolute worst part of the letter was the final paragraph. It escalated from a stern warning into a direct legal threat. Mr. Higgins stated that if I did not immediately contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation to withdraw my fraud report and formally validate the debt with the bank, he would file a massive civil lawsuit against me. The specific charge he was threatening was elder financial abuse. The letter argued that by maliciously freezing their access to their funds and launching a stressful federal investigation, I was actively endangering the physical and emotional well-being of my elderly parents. It claimed my calculated actions were specifically designed to force two vulnerable senior citizens into severe poverty and homelessness. He demanded I sign their original debt assumption agreement within 24 hours or face total financial ruin in civil court. I sat in my ergonomic chair and read the letter a second time. Any normal person outside of the financial sector might have panicked at the sight of a formal lawsuit threat. A normal person might have been terrified by the bold legal jargon and the threat of being dragged through court for abusing the elderly, but they completely forgot who they were dealing with. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my entire life dismantling complex financial crimes and reading the strict fine print of federal banking regulations. I know for an absolute fact that you cannot verbally gift your social security number to another human being to bypass strict bank lending laws. That is not a gift. That is federal bank fraud. And elder financial abuse laws are specifically designed to protect vulnerable seniors from being scammed by predatory caretakers. They are not designed to protect elderly criminals from facing the legal consequences of stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from their own children. I did not call the sleazy lawyer back to argue. I did not panic or cry. I simply placed the document on my flatbed scanner. By hiring a lawyer to officially admit that they used my identity, even under the absurd false premise of a verbal gift, they had just made a fatal mistake. They had just provided the federal investigators with a written, documented confession that they were indeed the ones who originated the fraudulent loan. I attached the scanned letter to an email and forwarded it directly to the bank fraud investigator. They thought they were backing me into a corner with their cheap legal threats. In reality, they had just handed me the final nail for their own coffin. I hit send on the email forwarding the sleazy lawyer's cease and desist letter to the Standard Fraud Department, but as I watched the progress bar complete, I realized that relying on the normal bureaucratic process was not going to be fast enough. Toxic people thrive in the gray areas of administrative delays. They use that time to hide money, to manipulate family members, and to twist the truth. I needed to cut off their oxygen immediately. I picked up the thick loan agreement again and stared at the First National Bank logo printed boldly at the top of the page. In the absolute chaos of the last few days, I had completely overlooked a massive strategic advantage. First National Bank was not just a random regional lender. They were one of the largest corporate clients my accounting firm represented. In fact, I had personally led a massive internal audit for their commercial lending division just 2 years ago. I did not just know their corporate structure. I knew their executive board on a first-name basis. I opened my secure corporate directory and searched for Thomas Mitchell. Thomas was the vice president of fraud investigation at First National. He was a sharp, no-nonsense executive who absolutely despised financial predators and had zero tolerance for scammers. I picked up my desk phone and dialed his direct private extension, bypassing the customer service queues entirely. He answered on the second ring. When I told him who I was and that I had an urgent high-level fraud case that directly impacted his institution, he did not hesitate. He told me to come to his office immediately. First National Bank headquarters was located just 4 blocks away from my building in the downtown Chicago financial district. I grabbed my leather briefcase, put on my heavy wool coat, and walked over, arriving at his top-floor executive suite within 15 minutes. Thomas greeted me with a professional handshake and offered me a seat at his massive, polished mahogany conference table. He sat down opposite me with a notepad ready. He expected me to hand him a corporate file about a rogue employee embezzling funds or a vendor running a complex invoice scam. Instead, I slid my thick red personal legal folder across the table. I need to report a massive coordinated fraud perpetrated against your retail lending division, I said, keeping my voice entirely professional and devoid of any emotion. 6 months ago, an unauthorized $400,000 home equity line of credit was opened using my Social Security number. The perpetrators forged my signature and immediately wired the funds to a newly formed limited liability company. Thomas frowned, opening the folder and adjusting his silver-framed glasses. He began scanning the primary documents. "Who is the perpetrator, Olivia?" he asked, pulling out the digital signature log and the Internet Protocol tracking data. "The primary suspects are my parents, Richard and Brenda," I replied smoothly. "The recipient of the stolen funds is my brother-in-law, Jamal. He created a fake business to receive the wire transfer and then systematically laundered the money through luxury vehicle purchases, high-end casinos, and personal payments to a young woman in Florida." Thomas stopped reading and looked up at me in absolute shock. The seasoned banking executive was genuinely stunned. "Your own parents stole almost $500,000 from you to fund your brother-in-law's gambling and mistresses." "Yes," I said, nodding slowly. And when I confronted them about the theft, they hired a bottom-feeding defense attorney to send me a formal cease and desist order. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the physical copy of the lawyer's letter, and handed it to him. I explained how the lawyer claimed I had verbally gifted them my social security number to secure the loan, and how they threatened to sue me for elder financial abuse if I did not legally accept the massive debt as my own. Thomas read the letter and actually let out a dry, humorless laugh. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes in disbelief. I have been investigating banking fraud for 25 years. Olivia and I have never seen anything this incredibly arrogant and stupid. They actually put their confession in writing on official legal letterhead. You cannot verbally gift your identity to bypass federal lending requirements. This is an absolute slam dunk case of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. I know, I replied, leaning forward, resting my hands on the mahogany table. But I did not come here just to file standard paperwork, Thomas. I came here because my family thinks they can bully me into submission. They think the bank will take months to investigate and that they can use that time to hide the remaining assets. I need First National to move on this immediately. I need suspicious activity reports filed with the federal government today. Thomas closed the red folder and placed his hands firmly on top of it. His expression hardened into the ruthless banking executive I knew him to be. They stole bank funds using a stolen identity and then tried to legally blackmail the victim. We do not take this lightly, Olivia. I am bypassing the Standard Review Board. I am handing this directly to our federal compliance team and our FBI liaison right now. We are going to freeze every single account tied to that fake business immediately. I thanked him and stood up to leave, feeling a profound sense of justice taking shape. But right before I walked out the heavy glass door, Thomas stopped me. He had opened the folder again and was looking closely at the original property deed records I had included in the back of the packet. He noticed something else entirely. Something that would turn this from a simple fraud case into an absolute financial massacre for my family. Olivia, wait a second, Thomas said, his voice suddenly dropping an octave. He was not looking at the fraud documents anymore. He was staring intensely at the final few pages of my file, which contained the public property records I had pulled just to be thorough. I turned around and walked back to the mahogany table. What is it, Thomas? I asked. He tapped his index finger against the copy of the quitclaim deed. This document right here. He began adjusting his glasses again. You said your father proudly announced at Thanksgiving that he and your mother signed the deed of their house over to your sister and her husband. Yes, I replied. He bragged about it in front of the entire family. He claimed they were building generational wealth for Jamal. Thomas looked up at me, his expression a mix of professional disbelief and grim satisfaction. Olivia, your parents' primary mortgage on that property is also held by First National Bank. They refinanced with us 5 years ago when you helped them with the down payment. Did your father by any chance mention if he contacted our mortgage division to get authorization before he executed this transfer? I shook my head. No. In fact, he specifically boasted that he was keeping the mortgage in his own name to protect Jamal's credit score. I actually warned him that transferring a deed while maintaining a mortgage was a massive legal risk, but he laughed in my face. He told me his real estate lawyer knew more than a glorified human calculator. Thomas let out a low whistle and leaned back in his leather chair. Well, his lawyer is a complete idiot. Or more likely, your father downloaded a cheap boilerplate legal form off the internet and never actually consulted a real attorney. Because if he had a real attorney, they would have warned him about the due on sale clause. My heart did a sudden heavy thump in my chest. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly what that clause was, but hearing a banking executive confirm it in relation to my own arrogant family was music to my ears. For those who do not work in the financial sector, the due on sale clause is a standard ironclad provision in almost every single mortgage contract in the United States. It is also known as an alienation clause. It explicitly states that if the borrower transfers ownership or any legal interest in the property without the bank's explicit written permission, the lender has the absolute right to demand the entire remaining balance of the loan paid in full immediately. Thomas spun his computer monitor around so I could see the screen. He had already pulled up my parents' original mortgage file. "Look at this, Olivia," he said, pointing to a highlighted section. "Section 18 of their master mortgage agreement. It is right there in black and white. By executing that quitclaim deed and filing it with the county clerk, your parents legally transferred ownership to Amanda. Because they did not notify us and clear the transfer, they breached their primary contract. What does that mean for them?" Practically, I asked, even though I already knew the devastating answer. "It means the $8,000 monthly payment they have been harassing you about is completely irrelevant now," Thomas said, his voice laced with absolute finality. "This mortgage is officially in default. They do not owe us $8,000 next month. They owe us the entire principal balance of $1.5 million. And they owe it right now." I stared at the screen, letting the massive reality of their stupidity sink in. They thought they were being so incredibly clever. They thought they could secretly carve up $1 million asset, hand the valuable equity to Amanda, stick me with the massive fraudulent debt, and leave the bank completely in the dark. Their arrogance had literally blinded them to basic real estate law. "What happens next?" Thomas, I asked, looking back at him. Thomas closed the file and folded his hands. "I am sending this to our Asset Recovery and Foreclosure Division immediately. We are going to issue a formal notice of default and acceleration. We will give them a standard period to produce the $1.5 million in cash. When they inevitably fail to do so, we will seize the property. Your sister and her husband are going to be evicted." He paused and gave me a serious look. "Olivia, I am going to freeze the fraudulent home equity line of credit right now and start the federal reporting process for the identity theft. You will be completely cleared of that $400,000 debt within the week. But you need to prepare yourself. When the bank drops this foreclosure bomb on your parents' house, the fallout is going to be incredibly ugly." I picked up my briefcase and smiled a cold, hard smile. "Let it fall, Thomas," I said. "They built their entire empire on lies. It is about time someone handed them the bill." I walked out of the bank headquarters and stepped onto the busy Chicago street. The cold winter wind hit my face, but I felt absolutely nothing but burning determination. The trap was set, and the countdown had officially begun. I finished the rest of my workday in a state of absolute hyper-focus. By the time I finally returned to my downtown condo that evening, the wheels of federal and financial justice were already aggressively grinding into motion. But my family was completely oblivious to the incoming destruction. They still thought they held the winning hand, and they were about to play what they believed was their ultimate trump card. I was sitting on my sofa drinking a glass of water and staring out at the city lights when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text message from Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol was the undisputed family gossip and my mother's most loyal flying monkey. She thrived on family drama and always positioned herself as the moral judge of our relatives. The text she sent was short and vicious. It read, "Have you seen what you are doing to your pregnant sister? You should be down on your knees begging for forgiveness. I hope you are happy with the monster you have become." I did not reply to her. Instead, I opened my social media application. I had blocked Amanda's accounts weeks ago to protect my own peace, but Aunt Carol had shared a post directly to her own public timeline, so I could not avoid seeing it. It was a massive multi-paragraph essay designed to extract maximum sympathy and inflict maximum public damage on my reputation. Attached to the very top of the post was a black and white ultrasound image. I began to read the devastatingly dramatic caption. Amanda claimed she had been rushed to the emergency room that afternoon with severe cramping and dangerously elevated blood pressure. She blamed the entire medical emergency on the extreme emotional distress caused by a certain jealous, greedy family member who was actively trying to ruin her marriage and steal her newly acquired home. She wrote a tearful paragraph about how the emergency room doctor had sternly warned her that she was at a very high risk of losing her miracle baby if the toxic stress did not stop immediately. She begged her friends and family for prayers during this dark and terrifying time. The comment section beneath the post was an absolute echo chamber of blind outrage. Dozens of aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends were offering their desperate prayers and openly condemning me. My mother had commented that she was doing absolutely everything in her power to protect her precious grandchild from pure evil. Jamal had commented right below her stating that a real man protects his queen and his unborn heir from jealous haters. It was a perfectly orchestrated public execution of my character. They were actively building a digital mob against me. Any normal sibling would have been absolutely crushed by the heavy weight of that public hatred. But I am not a normal sibling. I did not cry, and I did not write a defensive comment. I simply stared closely at the ultrasound picture. Something about the image nagged at my professional investigative instincts. The picture was slightly grainy, and the contrast looked artificially brightened. I zoomed in on the top right corner where the medical information is usually printed by the hospital ultrasound machine. The text was suspiciously blurry. It looked exactly like it had been deliberately cropped and then stretched to obscure the hospital name and the original patient details. You do not spend a decade hunting down corporate financial ghosts without learning how to quickly track digital artifacts. I saved the ultrasound image directly to my phone and immediately transferred the file to my personal laptop. I opened a specialized reverse image search engine that we frequently use at the accounting firm to verify digital expense receipts. I uploaded the ultrasound picture and hit the search button. The search algorithm took less than 3 seconds to scan the entire internet and return its definitive results. The screen populated with over 50 exact visual matches. I clicked on the very first link provided. It redirected me to a popular aesthetic Pinterest board dedicated to cute pregnancy announcements. The original image had been uploaded 4 years ago by a mommy blogger living in California. Amanda had literally typed ultrasound picture into Pinterest, downloaded the very first image she found, cropped out the blogger's watermarked name, and posted it to our entire extended family as her own medical record. I sat back on my sofa, the bright glow of the laptop illuminating the dark room. The implications were absolutely staggering. Amanda was not experiencing stress-induced medical complications at the hospital. Amanda was not pregnant at all. The entire pregnancy from the very beginning was a highly calculated theatrical performance. It was a fabricated weapon used to accelerate the transfer of the $1.5 million house and to emotionally blackmail my parents into stealing my identity to fund Jamal's lifestyle. She had faked a child to secure an empire. I carefully downloaded the Pinterest source links and took high-resolution screenshots of her entire fake Facebook post, along with every single nasty comment from my relatives. I added these new digital files to the master folder on my hard drive. My sister thought she was using a fake baby to finally turn the entire family against me permanently. She did not realize she was just loading the exact weapon that I was going to use to blow her entire fake life into a million pieces. I closed my laptop and finally went to sleep feeling more empowered than I had in my entire life. The next morning I woke up early, dressed in a sharp-tailored suit, and headed down to the secure underground parking garage of my condominium building. The garage was mostly empty and silent except for the low hum of the massive ventilation system. I was walking toward my car, jingling my keys, when a tall shadow suddenly stepped out from behind a thick concrete pillar, completely blocking my path. My heart spiked for a fraction of a second until the motion sensor lights flickered on, revealing the intruder. It was Jamal. But he did not look anything like the smug, arrogant tech entrepreneur who had openly mocked my salary at the Thanksgiving dinner table. He looked absolutely terrible. His expensive designer clothes were deeply wrinkled, he had dark, heavy bags under his eyes, and his hands were physically shaking. "Olivia, wait. Please do not call building security," he said, holding both of his hands up in a frantic gesture of surrender. "I just need 5 minutes to talk to you. Please, just give me 5 minutes." I stopped a few feet away from him, keeping a firm grip on my heavy metal car keys. "How did you get into a secure residential garage?" "Jamal?" I asked, my voice echoing sharply off the cold concrete walls. I waited for someone to pull out and slipped under the security gate. He admitted, his voice cracking slightly. Listen to me, Olivia. Something insane is happening. I woke up this morning and tried to buy a coffee, but my debit card was declined. I logged into my business banking portal, and every single account associated with my company is completely locked. It says there is a federal freeze on all my assets. I stared at him with absolutely zero sympathy. That is usually what happens when a bank discovers a massive wire fraud operation, I replied flatly. I told you and my parents at the coffee shop that I was formally reporting the theft. Did you think I was just negotiating for fun? Jamal's entire aggressive alpha male persona completely evaporated right in front of my eyes. His broad shoulders slumped, and he looked like a terrified child who had just been caught stealing. Olivia, you have to stop this, he begged, taking a desperate step toward me. The federal investigators are going to audit my entire life. If they start digging into the limited liability company records, they are going to see everything. They are going to see the Porsche. They are going to see the luxury trips to Las Vegas. They are going to see the wire transfers to Florida. And you are terrified that Amanda is going to find out about Destiny, I asked, tilting my head slightly. Jamal flinched violently as if I had physically struck him in the face. He swallowed hard. Amanda cannot know about that girl, Olivia. You know exactly how Amanda is. She will divorce me, and she will take absolutely everything I have left. She will ruin my life and broadcast it to the entire world. You cannot let them take the house. Look, I know I messed up. I know I got totally carried away with the money. But we can fix this right now, just between us, without the federal government tearing my life apart. I crossed my arms and waited for the punchline. How exactly do you plan to fix a $400,000 federal bank fraud privately in a parking garage, Jamal? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, his hands trembling so wildly he almost dropped it. I have hidden assets, Olivia. I have a secret decentralized cryptocurrency portfolio that my own lawyer does not even know about. It is completely off the grid. It is highly volatile right now, but it is guaranteed to skyrocket by the end of the fiscal year. If you call First National Bank today and tell them the fraud report was just a massive family misunderstanding, I will transfer 10% of my entire crypto portfolio directly into a private digital wallet for you. It will be worth millions in a few years. Just call off the federal agents, Olivia. Please. I stood there in the damp air of the underground garage and stared at the man my sister had chosen to marry. He was standing in front of me facing multiple federal felony charges, and his brilliant escape plan was to bribe a senior forensic accountant with invisible digital coins that probably did not even exist. I let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. The sound echoed loudly and clearly through the empty garage. You are offering me 10% of a fake digital portfolio to cover up a real $500,000 bank fraud, I asked, shaking my head in utter disbelief. Jamal, 10% of zero is zero. Even if you actually had cryptocurrency, you cannot bribe an auditor to unsee a documented crime. The wheels are already in motion. The bank has your forged loan documents, and the FBI has your home internet protocol address. Olivia. Please, Jamal whined, his voice pitching up in absolute sheer panic. We are family. You have to help your family. I pressed the unlock button on my key fob, and my car chirped loudly directly behind him. We were never family, Jamal, I said, stepping neatly around him and pulling my heavy car door open. You were just a financial parasite who thought he found an unlimited free meal. My professional advice to you is to sell that expensive Rolex on your wrist today. You are going to need the liquid cash to hire a very good criminal defense attorney. I got into my car, slammed the heavy door shut, and locked it immediately. Jamal hit his flat palms against my passenger side window, begging me to roll the glass down. I ignored him completely. I put the car in drive and pulled smoothly out of the parking space, leaving him standing completely alone in the cold concrete garage, surrounded by the absolute wreckage of his own making. I drove out of the parking garage that morning, leaving Jamal standing alone in the cold concrete wreckage of his own lies. You would think that facing multiple federal felony charges and a total asset freeze would force a person to cancel their weekend plans and hire a criminal defense attorney. But you can never underestimate the absolute blinding power of narcissistic delusion. Jamal must have gone back to the house and spun a spectacular web of lies. He likely told Amanda and my parents that the sudden bank freeze was just a routine corporate audit required by his imaginary venture capitalists. And because my family worshipped the illusion of wealth, they swallowed his ridiculous explanation completely. They refused to let a little thing like federal bank fraud ruin their social calendar. 2 days later, a glossy digital invitation landed in my email inbox. It was for a massive combined housewarming and gender reveal party hosted at the $1.5 million estate they had just stolen from the bank. My mother had manually added me to the guest list and attached a highly manipulative personal note. It read, "We are extending an olive branch to you, Olivia. Come celebrate our new blessing and our beautiful new home. Bring the signed debt assumption agreement with you, and we will publicly forgive your behavior. Do not be the one who destroys this family today." They were using the party as a final public pressure cooker. They wanted to surround me with the entire extended family and use the sheer weight of their collective judgment to force me into signing my financial life away. I did not reply to the email, but I did mark my calendar. I picked out a sharp, elegant black dress. If I was going to attend a funeral for their massive egos, I was going to dress appropriately. Saturday afternoon arrived. I drove to the affluent suburban neighborhood and parked my car half a block down the street from my parents' house. I mean Amanda's house. Actually, it was the bank's house. The street was absolutely packed with luxury vehicles belonging to every aunt, uncle, and cousin who had spent the last 3 days dragging my name through the mud on social media. I walked up the long paved driveway, and the display of unearned wealth was frankly sickening. There was a massive arch made of expensive pink and blue balloons framing the grand front door. A professional catering team was setting up a lavish buffet on the back patio, complete with a towering champagne fountain. My father had undoubtedly put the entire catering bill on his final high-interest credit card, since Jamal's business accounts were entirely locked by the government. I stood at the edge of the manicured lawn, just observing the absolute circus. Amanda was holding court in the center of the garden, wearing a tight pastel dress and constantly rubbing her fabricated baby bump. She was laughing loudly, soaking up the admiration of our relatives and gesturing grandly at the massive house. My mother and father were standing nearby, beaming with stolen pride and accepting endless congratulations on their brilliant real estate strategy. Aunt Carol spotted me first. She marched across the freshly cut grass, balancing a crystal champagne flute and a plate of expensive appetizers. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. "You actually showed up," she sneered, keeping her voice just loud enough for the neighboring guests to hear. "I hope you brought the legal paperwork to fix the horrible mess you started. Your mother has been crying all week because of your jealousy. You should be down on your knees apologizing to your pregnant sister." I did not blink. I did not defend myself. I just offered Aunt Carol a cold, empty smile and walked right past her toward the patio. I looked over at the outdoor kitchen. There was Jamal. He was standing alone, gripping a plastic cup so tightly his knuckles were white. He was not smiling, and he was not bragging about his tech empire. He looked like a man standing on a trapdoor, waiting for the heavy lever to be pulled. He was sweating profusely through his designer shirt, and his terrified eyes kept darting nervously toward the front street. He knew the federal government did not just freeze accounts and walk away. Right as I stepped onto the patio, I felt a sharp, heavy vibration in my designer purse. I reached inside and pulled out my phone. The notification on my lock screen was an urgent encrypted email from Thomas Mitchell, the Vice President of Fraud Investigation at First National Bank. I opened the message. It was incredibly brief, but it carried the destructive force of a legal hurricane. It read, "Olivia, the forensic audit is complete. The bank has officially initiated the immediate foreclosure protocols due to the unauthorized deed transfer. Additionally, the federal magistrate has reviewed our evidence regarding the identity theft and wire fraud. The federal arrest warrants have just been signed. Both the bank asset recovery team and the federal agents will be executing their orders at the property today at exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I read the email twice to savor every single word of it. Then I looked up from my glowing screen and glanced at the expensive digital clock mounted above the outdoor grill. The glowing red numbers read 3:55. I slipped my phone back into my purse, smoothed out my black skirt, and stepped right into the center of the party. I had exactly 5 minutes to enjoy the appetizers before my family lost absolutely everything. The patio was a sea of pastel dresses and tailored linen suits. As I walked past the massive champagne fountain, the lively chatter around me began to die down. It was like a dark cloud had suddenly rolled over the sun. Extended family members who had known me since I was a child turned their backs or whispered loudly behind their hands. Cousins I used to play with in this very yard gave me looks of pure absolute disgust. I was officially the family pariah, the ungrateful villain who was trying to ruin a beautiful family milestone. I walked toward the outdoor bar to get a glass of sparkling water. Uncle George stepped directly into my path, completely blocking my way. Uncle George was my father's older brother and the self-appointed moral compass of the entire extended family. He had a stern, weathered face and a tone of voice that demanded absolute respect. "I am very surprised you had the nerve to show your face here today, Olivia," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. "Your father is a good man. He worked his entire life to provide for you, and this is how you repay him, by threatening him with lawyers and throwing a tantrum over a little bit of money. You are 34 years old. It is time you grew up and learned how to share." I looked at my uncle. He had no idea what was actually happening. None of them did. They only knew the twisted, fabricated version of reality that my mother had spoon-fed them. I did not owe him an explanation, but I could not resist planting a single seed of doubt. "Did my father tell you exactly how much money we are talking about, Uncle George?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "Did he mention the $400,000 federal bank fraud? Or did he just say I was being difficult?" Uncle George scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Do not use those exaggerated corporate words with me. Your mother told us everything. She said you got confused about a simple co-signed loan and threw a massive fit because Jamal is more successful than you. You should be deeply ashamed of yourself for treating your parents so poorly. They gave you life, Olivia. The least you can do is sign that piece of paper so your sister can enjoy her party in peace." Before I could even respond to his ridiculous lecture, a loud, high-pitched voice cut through the heavy tension. "Oh my God, you actually came!" I turned around to see Amanda pushing her way through the crowd of relatives. She was resting both hands heavily on her fake stomach, walking with an exaggerated waddle that was honestly insulting to actual pregnant women. My mother and father were walking right behind her, flanking her like a pair of royal bodyguards. The entire party went dead silent. Every single eye on that patio was locked directly on me. We were in the absolute center of the lion's den. My mother stepped forward, her eyes immediately scanning my empty hands. "Where is your briefcase, Olivia?" she demanded, her voice tight with anxiety. "Did you bring the signed debt assumption agreement like I asked you to?" My father puffed out his chest, trying to look authoritative in front of the extended family. "We are not playing games today, Olivia. You are going to hand over that signed release form right now and apologize to your sister. If you do that, we will allow you to stay and eat. If you do not, you can turn right around and walk off my property." I looked at my father. "Your property?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you absolutely sure about that, Dad?" Amanda's face flushed bright red. "Stop being so incredibly difficult," she yelled, her voice echoing across the silent backyard. "Why do you always have to ruin everything for me? This is my special day. This is my house. You have a great job and plenty of money. Why can you not just pay the stupid bank and let us be happy? You are a terrible sister." The relatives standing around us began to murmur in agreement. I heard someone mutter the word selfish. Another person whispered that I was completely heartless. They were closing in on me, a united front of toxic enablers perfectly manipulated by a family of financial criminals. They wanted to break me down right there in front of everyone. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out my cell phone. I tapped the screen to illuminate the digital clock. It was exactly 3:59 in the afternoon. The seconds were ticking down rapidly. I looked up from my screen and smiled directly at my sister. I am not going to pay the bank. Amanda, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet patio. But you do not need to worry. The bank is actually coming here to collect the payment themselves. My father frowned deeply, his face contorting in complete confusion. What on earth are you talking about? He demanded. I did not have to answer him. At that exact moment, the sound of heavy tires crunching aggressively onto the gravel driveway echoed from the front of the heavy slam of multiple car doors echoing from the front driveway caused a sudden ripple of confusion across the patio. A few relatives craned their necks trying to peer around the side of the massive brick house to see who had arrived so late. Jamal flinched so violently he nearly knocked over a towering floral arrangement. His eyes were wide and filled with absolute sheer terror. He stared at the wooden side gate, knowing exactly who was walking up the driveway. He knew his time had officially run out. But instead of running or surrendering, Jamal did the only thing a true narcissist knows how to do when their fake reality begins to crumble. He aggressively doubled down on the illusion. Desperate to distract the crowd and maintain his wealthy facade for just a few more seconds, he sprinted over to the small wooden platform where the hired disc jockey was managing the music. He grabbed a crystal flute of expensive champagne from a passing waiter and snatched the primary wireless microphone off its metal stand. "Can I get everyone to gather around, please?" Jamal shouted into the microphone. His voice was entirely too loud and possessed a frantic cracking edge, but he forced a massive bright smile across his sweating face. The extended family turned their attention away from the driveway and faced the patio stage. My mother and father immediately beamed with pride, moving to stand right at the front of the crowd. Amanda waddled up the steps to stand next to her husband, placing both hands protectively over her fake stomach and smiling like royalty, greeting her loyal subjects. Jamal raised his crystal glass high into the air. "I want to propose a toast to my beautiful pregnant wife and to my amazing in-laws, Richard and Brenda," he announced, his voice projecting over the massive outdoor speakers. They believed in my vision when nobody else did. They knew that my tech startup was going to change the world. And now look at us. We are standing in the backyard of our own $1.5 million estate. Several aunts and uncles clapped loudly, cheering for his tremendous success. This house is not just a building. Jamal continued, gripping the microphone so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. This house represents generational wealth. It represents the reward for hard work, brilliant investing, and keeping your family close. We are building an absolute empire here today, and nobody is going to take that away from us. To the future. To the future, the crowd echoed in unison, raising their assorted drinks into the air. Before anyone could take a single sip of their champagne, I stepped out from the center of the crowd and walked directly up the wooden steps of the small stage. The relatives standing near the front gasped audibly. My mother let out a sharp noise of absolute outrage, stepping forward, as if she was going to physically drag me off the platform. Jamal lowered his glass and glared at me, his eyes silently begging me to back down. "Get off the stage, Olivia," he hissed, covering the microphone with his hand. "You are ruining everything." I did not look at him. I calmly walked over to the disc jockey's mixing board. I reached down and firmly pulled the cable connecting Jamal's wireless receiver to the main speakers, instantly cutting off his audio feed. Then I picked up the secondary wired microphone resting on the edge of the table and flicked the power switch on. I tapped the metal grate twice. The sharp thumping sound echoed perfectly across the suddenly dead silent backyard. Every single person on that patio stared at me in absolute shock. I have a gift for the new homeowners, I announced, my voice ringing clearly and steadily through the high-end sound system. Amanda let out a loud, dramatic sob, grabbing Jamal's arm. "Make her leave, Jamal," she cried out. "She is trying to ruin my special day because she is completely alone and miserable." I turned to face my sister, offering her a cold, razor-sharp smile. "I am not here to ruin anything, Amanda. In fact, I think it is incredibly beautiful that Jamal just gave a speech about the importance of generational wealth and brilliant investing. He has been so incredibly modest about his massive success today. I think it is only fair that the entire family gets to see exactly how he secured the funding for his tech empire and exactly how you acquired the deed to this magnificent house." My father pushed his way to the very front of the crowd, his face purple with rage. "Turn that microphone off right now, Olivia," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I will not let you embarrass this family with your petty, jealous lies." I ignored his screaming completely. I reached into my designer leather purse and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I held it up high so every single aunt, uncle, and cousin standing on the patio could see it clearly in the afternoon sun. "True generational wealth requires proper legal documentation," I said into the microphone, locking eyes with Jamal. "And I brought the official paperwork straight from First National Bank to share with all of you." I stepped down from the wooden platform and walked directly toward my sister. The crowd of relatives parted for me like the Red Sea. I extended my arm and pressed the heavy manila envelope right against Amanda's chest. She instinctively reached up and grabbed it, her fingers trembling slightly. "Open it, Amanda," I said, leaning in close so only she could hear the absolute ice in my voice. "Consider it my contribution to your beautiful new home." Amanda tore the flap open and pulled out the thick stack of premium bank paper. The First National Bank logo was printed boldly in bright red ink at the top of the very first page. I watched her eyes dart back and forth as she read the bold, capitalized letters. "Notice of default and immediate acceleration." The color completely drained from her face in an instant, leaving her looking like a ghost standing in the middle of a vibrant garden. She dropped the entire stack of papers onto the grass as if it had physically burned her. I turned around and lifted the microphone back to my mouth. "What Amanda is currently looking at is a formal legal notice from First National Bank," I announced, my voice echoing cleanly off the brick walls of the stolen house. "When Mom and Dad decided to secretly use a quitclaim deed to transfer the ownership of this property to Amanda, they thought they were pulling off the ultimate real estate scam. They thought they could give away a $1.5 million asset while keeping the mortgage in their own names to protect Jamal's terrible credit." The aunts and uncles were staring at me with wide eyes, completely silent now. Aunt Carol actually dropped her plate of appetizers onto the patio stones. But they completely forgot to read the fine print. I continued pacing slowly in front of the stunned crowd. "Every standard mortgage contains a due on sale clause. It means you cannot just hand over the deed to a new owner without the lender's explicit written permission. If you do, it triggers an automatic and irreversible default." So Mom and Dad did not just give you a free house, Amanda. They completely voided the loan agreement. You do not owe the bank $8,000 next month. You owe the bank $1.5 million, and you owe it today. My father lunged forward, his face twisted in absolute fury and sheer panic. "That is a lie," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "My lawyer drafted that deed perfectly. You are just printing out fake bank papers to ruin this party because you are a jealous, bitter woman." I looked right at my father. "Your cheap internet lawyer drafted a property deed, Dad. He did not override federal banking contracts." I sat down with Thomas Mitchell, the Vice President of Fraud Investigation at First National Bank, yesterday afternoon. He was the one who personally signed that notice of default. The bank is foreclosing on this property. They are seizing the house, and you are all going to be evicted. My mother, Brenda, fell to her knees on the manicured grass, frantically gathering the scattered papers. She held the official notice in her shaking hands, reading the massive dollar amount printed at the bottom of the page. "No," she gasped, her voice cracking with genuine terror. "No, this cannot be right. Olivia, you work for them. You have to call them and fix this right now." Tell them it was just a family misunderstanding." Amanda let out a piercing, high-pitched scream that made several guests physically flinch. She grabbed Jamal's arm, her acrylic nails digging violently into his expensive suit jacket. "Jamal, tell me she is lying," Amanda shrieked, shaking him back and forth. "Tell me we do not owe $1 million. Tell them your tech investors will just buy the house right now. Show them the money, Jamal." Jamal stood there frozen like a statue. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely nothing came out. The slick, arrogant tech entrepreneur had completely vanished, leaving behind a terrified fraud. He was sweating so heavily his collar was completely soaked through. "Listen, Amanda," he finally stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. "It is just a temporary issue with the corporate underwriters. I will make a few calls to my venture capitalists on Monday. We can easily secure bridge financing to cover the mortgage gap." I raised the microphone again and offered him a cold smile. "You cannot secure bridge financing when your business accounts are already frozen by the federal government, Jamal. You do not have investors, and you do not have a tech company." The entire patio erupted into chaotic, panicked whispers. Jamal's eyes darted toward the wooden side gate, completely terrified. But before he could even take a single step backward toward the exit, the heavy sound of marching boots echoed loudly up the gravel driveway. The real guests of honor had finally arrived. The heavy sound of marching boots echoing up the gravel driveway completely shattered the fragile silence on the patio. Every single person at the party turned their heads toward the tall wooden side gate. The chaotic whispers of the extended family escalated into a low, panicked hum. My father realized that he was rapidly losing control of his perfect narrative. He stepped right into the center of the patio, waving his arms frantically to distract the crowd. "Do not listen to a single word she says," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "This is all a pathetic, elaborate hoax. She printed fake bank papers to ruin your sister's party. Those people walking up the driveway are probably just actors she hired. She is a lying, jealous monster who cannot stand to see her own family succeed." Before anyone could even react to his ridiculous accusation, the heavy wooden side gate swung violently open. They were definitely not actors. Two tall men and one woman stepped onto the manicured grass. They were dressed in dark tactical windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI printed boldly across their backs. Three uniformed local police officers walked in right behind them, their hands resting casually on their heavy duty belts. The entire patio erupted into absolute chaos. Aunts and uncles who had been viciously mocking me just 10 minutes earlier were now physically backing away, scrambling to put as much distance as possible between themselves and my parents. The hired catering staff completely abandoned the buffet tables. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the heavy rhythmic crunch of the federal agents' boots walking across the expensive patio stones. My father puffed out his chest and raised his chin, attempting to use his affluent suburban arrogance to intimidate the federal government. "Excuse me, officers," he demanded, his voice trembling despite his aggressive posture. "You are actively trespassing on private property. I do not know what my bitter daughter told you on the phone, but she filed a completely false police report. This is a private family matter. I am calling my attorney right now, and I want you all off my lawn immediately." I stepped forward and gestured calmly toward the federal agents. "Actually, Dad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady, "they are not here for the house. The bank is handling the foreclosure separately. They are here for the $400,000 home equity line of credit you opened using my Social Security number. That is aggravated identity theft and federal bank fraud." The lead federal agent stepped past me, completely ignoring my father's false bravado. He pulled a thick folded document from his jacket pocket. "Are you Richard and Brenda?" he asked, his voice booming with undeniable authority. My mother. Brenda let out a pathetic whimpering sound. She dropped the foreclosure papers onto the grass and pressed her hands against her mouth. "Richard, tell them to leave," she cried out, her voice completely dissolving into sheer panic. "Richard, do something right now." My father looked frantically around the patio, searching for any ally. He locked eyes with Uncle George. "George, tell them this is a misunderstanding," my father pleaded. Tell them Olivia verbally gifted us her credit profile to help the family. Uncle George, the man who had just lectured me about respect and sharing, did the exact opposite of helping. He physically took 3 steps backward, holding both of his hands up in the air, and shook his head rapidly. I have absolutely nothing to do with your finances, Richard, Uncle George said, his voice tight with fear. Do not bring me into this. The flying monkeys always scatter the absolute second real consequences arrive. The lead agent did not wait for any more family drama. Richard and Brenda. I have federal warrants for your arrest, he announced loudly. You are both being charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and defrauding a federal financial institution. Turn around and place your hands behind your backs. My father tried to pull away as one of the agents reached for his arm. You cannot do this, he screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. She is our daughter. We are family. We were going to pay the money back. It was just a bridge loan. A verbal agreement to use a stolen identity does not bypass federal lending laws, sir, the agent replied coldly, effortlessly, twisting my father's arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed across the patio. It was the absolute sweetest sound I had ever heard in my entire life. My mother collapsed onto the grass, completely hysterical, sobbing wildly as the female agent carefully pulled her up by her arms and locked her into handcuffs as well. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy family was completely dead and buried. As my parents were being read their Miranda rights in front of the entire horrified family, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. While all the attention was focused on my screaming parents, Jamal was slowly and quietly inching his way backward toward the rear fence. He thought the federal agents were only there for my parents. He actually thought he was going to slip away in the confusion. I turned the microphone back on and took a deep breath. I was not finished yet. Jamal took another slow step backward, his expensive leather shoes sliding softly across the manicured grass. He was inches away from the heavy wooden gate that led out to the alleyway. He was sweating profusely, and his eyes were darting frantically, looking for any possible way out of the trap he had walked right into. "Excuse me, officer," I said, speaking clearly into the microphone so my voice echoed across the entire patio. "The man trying to sneak out through the back gate right now is Jamal. He is the sole managing member of the fake limited liability company that received the stolen $400,000. He is the primary beneficiary of the wire fraud." Jamal froze completely. The female federal agent who had just secured my mother immediately turned around. 2 of the local police officers did not hesitate for a single second. They sprinted across the patio, cutting off Jamal's escape route and grabbing him firmly by both shoulders before his hand could even touch the wooden latch of the gate. Jamal immediately started thrashing his alpha male facade, completely disintegrating into sheer pathetic panic. "Get your hands off me!" he shouted, his voice cracking wildly. "I did not forge any signatures. I did not steal any identities. It was my in-laws. They did all the paperwork. I am completely innocent. I just received the funds." The lead federal agent walked over to Jamal and pulled out a 3rd pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Receiving stolen federal funds and laundering them through a shell company makes you a primary co-conspirator," the agent stated coldly. "You are under arrest for federal money laundering, wire fraud, and receiving stolen property. Turn around." The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs securing Jamal's wrists echoed loudly. Amanda stood completely alone in the center of the patio. Her royal bodyguards were currently in handcuffs, and her wealthy husband was being forcefully pushed against the brick wall of the house to be searched. She looked like a lost, terrified child. She wrapped her arms tightly around her fake stomach and stared at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Olivia, please," Amanda begged, her voice trembling violently. "Please tell them to stop. Jamal is building a business for our family. He is building a future for our baby. Why are you doing this to us?" I stepped down from the stage and walked slowly toward her. The aunts and uncles who had been whispering terrible things about me just moments ago completely parted out of my way, stepping back in absolute stunned silence. I looked down at the thick stack of bank papers Amanda had dropped onto the grass earlier. I pointed at the scattered documents. There is no business, Amanda. I said, my voice steady and unwavering. I audited his entire company ledger line by line. Pick up those papers and look at page 4. Amanda did not move. She just shook her head rapidly, side to side, refusing to look at the truth lying right at her feet. She was desperately clinging to the final shreds of her fabricated reality. I will read it for you then. I continued, speaking loud enough for the entire silent crowd of relatives to hear. Your husband did not put a single dime of that stolen money into an artificial intelligence startup. 3 days after my parents committed federal fraud to fund his account, he walked into a luxury dealership and bought that Porsche sitting in your driveway with straight cash. Amanda let out a shaky breath, but she still tried to defend him. He needed a company car, she whispered weakly, tears streaming down her carefully applied makeup. It was for networking with venture capitalists. He also needed luxury hotel suites in Cabo San Lucas, I replied relentlessly, refusing to let her hide behind any more lies. He needed $30,000 worth of high-end jewelry. He needed VIP tables at Las Vegas casinos. But most importantly, Amanda, he needed a massive operating budget to fund his secret double life. Amanda's face contorted in deep confusion. What double life? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked directly into her eyes, watching the devastating realization slowly wash over her. The double life he is living with a 22-year-old internet model named Destiny, I said clearly. Every other Friday, exactly $5,000 is wired directly from his fake business account to her personal checking account in Miami, Florida. He even took her to a luxury resort 3 weeks ago while you were here pretending to be a happy, wealthy wife. I have the photographs and the digital wire transfer logs right here in my briefcase. The words hung heavily in the warm afternoon air. Amanda slowly turned her head and looked over at Jamal. He was standing near the gate with his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. He was staring at the ground, completely unable to look his pregnant wife in the eye. Jamal, Amanda screamed, her voice tearing through the backyard like a high-pitched siren. Tell me she is lying, Jamal. Is lying. Tell me you did not take my parents' money to sleep with some girl in Miami. Jamal swallowed hard, but he remained completely silent. His absolute silence was the ultimate confession. Amanda completely snapped. She lunged across the grass, screaming hysterically and swinging her fists wildly at Jamal's chest. The local police officers had to physically step in, pull her back, and restrain her. She fought against them, kicking and sobbing, her perfect pastel party dress getting stained with dirt and spilled champagne. The entire extended family watched the spectacular meltdown in absolute horror. The perfect golden child and the brilliant tech entrepreneur were completely exposed. Their entire lives were built on a foundation of lies, theft, and absolute betrayal. Amanda collapsed onto the hard patio stones, her hands clutching her pastel dress right over her stomach. She realized that her husband was completely exposed and going to federal prison. She realized her parents were in handcuffs and the bank was taking her house. Her perfectly constructed world had shattered, so she immediately resorted to the only weapon she had left. She began taking sharp, gasping breaths, twisting her body on the ground and screaming in pure agony. My baby, Amanda shrieked, her voice piercing through the stunned silence of the backyard. The stress is killing my baby. Call an ambulance right now. She is trying to kill my unborn child. The sudden medical emergency sent a shockwave through the remaining crowd. 2 of the local police officers immediately stepped forward, their training kicking in, as they reached for their radios to call for paramedics. Aunt Carol, who had been standing frozen in horror, suddenly snapped out of her trance. She rushed forward, hovering over Amanda and glaring at me with absolute sheer hatred. "Look what you have done!" Aunt Carol screamed at me, her face red with misplaced righteous fury. "You have pushed your own pregnant sister into a miscarriage. If she loses this baby, it is entirely your fault, Olivia." My handcuffed mother wailed loudly from the grass, begging the officers to help her precious daughter. Even Jamal looked up from the brick wall, his eyes wide with panic. I did not panic. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I simply walked over to the massive outdoor entertainment system mounted above the patio bar. Jamal had set up a state-of-the-art 85-inch smart television screen specifically to display a slideshow of their beautiful new home. The screen was currently displaying a generic digital screensaver. I pulled my cell phone from my purse and quickly connected to the outdoor wireless network. "She does not need an ambulance," I announced, my voice perfectly calm and steady. I tapped the screen mirroring function on my phone, and the massive television screen instantly flashed black before mirroring my digital display. "What are you doing?" my father demanded, struggling against the federal agent's grip. "Your sister is having a medical emergency." I swiped my thumb across my phone screen, opening the high-resolution screenshots I had saved 2 nights ago. The massive outdoor television illuminated brightly, displaying Amanda's dramatic Facebook post for the entire extended family to see. The giant black-and-white ultrasound picture was projected larger than life, right above the patio bar. 2 days ago, Amanda posted this ultrasound image, claiming that my actions were causing severe medical complications. I said, gesturing toward the giant screen. She used this exact image to turn this entire family against me. She claimed the emergency room doctor warned her she might lose her miracle baby. Aunt Carol looked up at the screen and then back down at Amanda. "Yes, she did," Aunt Carol snapped defensively. "And now it is actually happening because you will not stop terrorizing her." I swiped my thumb to the left. The image on the massive television screen instantly changed. The new image was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was Amanda's Facebook ultrasound. On the right was the exact same ultrasound image, but this one was uncropped and fully watermarked. The original source link was displayed clearly at the top of the page. It was a mommy blog from California, dated exactly 4 years ago. I turned away from the screen and looked directly down at my sister, who was still writhing on the patio stones. "You are not pregnant, Amanda," I said, my voice cutting through the warm afternoon air like a frozen blade. "You never were. You downloaded a stock photo from Pinterest and cropped out the watermark. You fabricated an entire pregnancy because you needed the ultimate excuse to rush the deed transfer of this house. You needed an untouchable shield to steal my money, and you knew Mom and Dad would do absolutely anything to protect their imaginary grandchild." The absolute silence that fell over the patio was suffocating. The 2 local police officers, who were just about to call for paramedics, slowly lowered their radios, staring at the undeniable digital proof glowing on the massive screen. Aunt Carol stood up slowly, physically backing away from Amanda as if she had suddenly caught a contagious disease. Amanda's dramatic gasping stopped instantly. The fake tears completely dried up. She sat up on the patio stones, her hands slowly falling away from her stomach. She looked up at the massive television screen and then looked around at the faces of her relatives. The extended family was not looking at her with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her with absolute raw disgust. The aunts, uncles, and cousins who had fiercely defended her all afternoon were staring at a woman who had weaponized a fake unborn child to commit massive financial fraud against her own flesh and blood. Jamal stared at his wife, his jaw completely dropped. Even he did not know. Amanda had manipulated her own scamming husband to secure her position. My mother, Brenda, slumped completely forward in the grass, sobbing in total defeat. The golden child was not just a spoiled brat. She was a calculated pathological liar, and her ultimate manipulation tool had just been permanently destroyed in front of everyone she knew. The massive television screen continued to glow brightly against the afternoon sun, casting a harsh light over the absolute ruins of my family. My mother, Brenda, remained slumped in the grass, her hands cuffed securely behind her back. She stared at the digital evidence of Amanda's fake pregnancy, and the realization slowly washed over her face. She had risked federal prison, committed massive financial fraud, and destroyed her relationship with her only financially stable daughter, all to protect a grandchild that did not even exist. She had burned her entire life to the ground for an absolute lie. The female federal agent placed a firm hand on my mother's shoulder and instructed her to stand up. It was time to process the prisoners and transport them to the federal holding facility in downtown Chicago. But the stark reality of the handcuffs and the impending jail cell finally shattered my mother's deeply ingrained narcissism. Her instinct for self-preservation violently kicked in. As the agent pulled her upward, my mother suddenly threw her weight forward, dropping hard onto her knees right in front of me. The sharp movement startled the local police officers, but the federal agent maintained a tight grip on her arms. My mother looked up at me, and her face was completely unrecognizable. The smug, arrogant woman who had mocked my career at Thanksgiving was entirely gone. In her place was a terrified, desperate criminal begging for her life. "Olivia, please, my mother," sobbed her tears, cutting paths through the expensive makeup on her cheeks. "Please do not let them take me away. I am your mother. I raised you. I gave you everything I had. You cannot send me to federal prison. You know I would never survive in a place like that." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. I did not feel a single drop of pity. "Tell them you gave us permission." "Olivia?" My mother begged, her voice pitching into a hysterical shriek. "Tell the federal agents that we had a verbal agreement. Tell them it was all just a massive family misunderstanding about the paperwork. We will sell everything we own. We will pay the bank back every single penny. I promise you will never have to pay a dime. Just please tell them you authorized the loan. I will do anything you want. I will get on my hands and knees and apologize to you every single day for the rest of my life." My father, Richard, who was standing a few feet away with his own hands cuffed firmly behind his back, completely broke down as well. His affluent suburban pride was shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. He looked at me with red, weeping eyes. "Please, Olivia," my father cried out, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "Do not do this to us. We made a terrible mistake. We were stupid and greedy, but we are still your family. Please save us." I slowly looked away from my kneeling parents and scanned the faces of the extended family members standing on the patio. Aunt Carol, who had loudly demanded that I get on my knees and apologize to Amanda just 20 minutes ago, was now staring at the ground, completely unable to make eye contact with me. Uncle George was backing away toward the outdoor bar, pretending he was not associated with us at all. The entire flock of flying monkeys who had enabled their toxic behavior for decades had instantly abandoned them the second real consequences arrived. I looked back down at my mother. She was shaking violently, waiting for me to speak the magic words that would somehow undo the federal crimes she had willingly committed. She actually believed that because I had always been the quiet, reliable daughter, I would fold under the pressure of her tears. She thought my lifelong desperate need for her approval would finally override my own sense of self-preservation. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice low, calm, and absolutely steady. "Do you remember what you said to me at the Thanksgiving dinner table when you announced you were giving this $1.5 million house to Amanda?" My mother blinked rapidly, her breath catching in her throat. She did not answer me. She knew exactly what she had said. "You looked me right in the eye and you told me that I did not need a house." I continued, ensuring that every single relative on the patio could hear my final verdict. "You told me I was just a bitter single woman obsessed with my spreadsheets. You told me that Amanda and Jamal deserved everything, and that I deserved absolutely nothing." I took a slow, deliberate step backward, putting physical distance between myself and the toxic family that had suffocated me for 34 years. "You were completely right, Mom," I said, offering her one last cold smile. "I do not deserve anything you have given me. I do not deserve the lies, and I do not deserve the theft. But most importantly, I do not deserve this family. Goodbye." I did not wait for her response. I did not stay to watch the federal agents pull her off the grass and march her toward the waiting police cruisers. I turned my back on the massive brick house, the extravagant balloon arch, and the sprawling patio filled with silent, ashamed relatives. I walked straight down the gravel driveway, my head held high and my shoulders completely relaxed. The sound of my heels clicking against the pavement was the only sound I focused on. I walked out of their lives forever, leaving them to drown in the absolute wreckage of their own making. Exactly 3 days later, on a crisp Tuesday morning, I decided to take a slight detour on my regular commute to the corporate office. I did not do it out of pity, and I certainly did not do it to offer any last-minute financial help. I did it because, as a forensic accountant, I deeply appreciate seeing a complex case fully closed. I turned my car onto the familiar, affluent suburban street and parked quietly about half a block away from the $1.5 million property. The massive arch of expensive pink and blue balloons was completely gone. In its place was a heavy commercial moving truck parked aggressively across the manicured lawn, deeply crushing the expensive landscaping my father used to brag about. The Asset Recovery Division at First National Bank does not waste any time when a multi-million-dollar loan goes into hard default. A team of burly men wearing heavy work boots and high-visibility vests were systematically dragging Amanda's expensive furniture out the front door and dumping it unceremoniously onto the gravel driveway. I watched as two movers wrestled a massive white velvet sofa out the front door, followed by a heavy crystal chandelier that had once hung in the grand foyer. Amanda was standing on the sidewalk watching her entire fabricated empire being dismantled piece by piece. She was not wearing a pastel designer dress today. She was wearing oversized gray sweatpants, and the fake baby bump was noticeably absent. She was screaming at the movers, waving her arms frantically, and demanding they be careful with her luxury items. My car dashboard suddenly chimed, indicating an incoming phone call. I tapped the screen, and Thomas Mitchell's voice filled the quiet cabin of my vehicle. "Good morning, Olivia," Thomas said, his tone strictly professional but carrying a distinct note of absolute satisfaction. "I just wanted to give you an official update. The foreclosure is fully executed. Our crews are securing the property right now and changing all the exterior locks. The house officially belongs to the bank again." "I am actually watching them right now, Thomas," I replied, leaning back in my leather seat. "They work incredibly fast. When federal fraud is involved, we do not leave anything to chance," Thomas explained. "Speaking of the fraud, you will be pleased to know that your brother-in-law had his initial detention hearing yesterday afternoon. Jamal tried to convince the federal magistrate that he was just a misunderstood tech entrepreneur and pleaded for house arrest. But when the prosecutor presented the wire transfer logs showing him funneling stolen money to Miami, the judge immediately classified him as a severe flight risk. Jamal was completely denied bail. He is going to be sitting in a federal holding cell until his trial. Oh, and federal agents already towed his Porsche out of the driveway yesterday morning." I smiled, looking out the windshield at the empty spot where the luxury car used to be. "What about my parents?" I asked. "They were granted a conditional release on bond late last night," Thomas stated. "But their passports have been surrendered, and all their remaining personal financial accounts are completely frozen pending the ongoing federal investigation. They are officially indigent, which means they have absolutely nowhere to live once my crew finishes clearing out that house today." I thanked Thomas for his swift and ruthless action and ended the call. Just as the dashboard screen went dark, I noticed sudden movement outside. Amanda had finally spotted my car parked down the street. She stopped yelling at the movers and began speed-walking toward me, her face twisted in a mixture of anger and absolute desperation. She reached my car and slammed her flat palms violently against the passenger side window. I reached over and pressed the button, lowering the glass just 2 inches. "You have to help me, Olivia," Amanda demanded, her voice cracking with pure panic. "They are taking everything. They are throwing my designer clothes into cheap cardboard boxes. Jamal is locked in a cage, and Mom and Dad have no money to pay for a hotel. We literally have nowhere to go. You have to let us stay at your downtown condo until Jamal clears this up." I turned my head and looked at my sister. Even now, surrounded by the total destruction of her own lies, she still could not grasp the reality of the situation. She still thought she was fully entitled to my resources. "Jamal is not clearing anything up, Amanda," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "He was denied bail. He is facing a decade in federal prison. And you are standing on the sidewalk watching the bank repossess a house that you actively tried to steal from me. But we are blood. Amanda whined, fresh tears spilling down her pale cheeks. You cannot just leave your pregnant sister out on the street like trash. I stared at her, letting the absolute staggering absurdity of her lie hang in the cold morning air. You are not pregnant, Amanda, I reminded her sharply, looking her up and down. The entire family knows you lied. The federal agents know you lied. You cannot use a fake baby to manipulate me anymore. Your magic trick is completely broken. I rolled the window up, ignoring her frantic screaming as she pounded on the glass again. I put the car in drive and pulled smoothly away from the curb. I watched her in my rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until she was just a pathetic figure standing alone next to a pile of repossessed furniture. Driving away that day was the absolute final closure I needed. Over the next 6 months, the legal and financial reality of their choices settled over my family like a suffocating heavy blanket. Because I am a senior forensic accountant, I did not need to rely on the toxic family gossip mill to know exactly what was happening to them. Public court dockets, federal asset seizure logs, and basic property registries tell a much more accurate and ruthless story than Aunt Carol ever could. Without the stolen equity from the massive house, and with their credit scores completely decimated by the federal bank fraud indictments, my parents found themselves entirely locked out of the affluent suburban lifestyle they had worshipped for decades. No reputable landlord in any decent zip code would even consider renting to a couple facing multiple federal felony charges and holding credit scores in the low 400s. The banks had stripped them bare. They were forced to drain the very last pennies of my father's meager legitimate savings just to secure a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a run-down industrial complex on the absolute outer edge of the city. The building was notorious for peeling paint, a broken security gate, and a deafening view of a massive interstate highway. It was a staggering, humiliating fall from grace for a woman who used to host lavish catered garden parties on a manicured stone patio. To make matters worse, my father was forced to take a minimum wage job as a night shift security guard at a local warehouse just to keep the lights on, since his remaining retirement funds were severely restricted by the ongoing federal investigation. I learned through the public court filings that Aunt Carol and Uncle George did not even show up to help them move their cheap remaining boxes. The flying monkeys who had eagerly eaten their catered food and cheered for my downfall had completely vanished. Toxic enablers only stick around when there is a comfortable show to watch. The second the stage collapsed, my parents were left completely alone. But the ultimate poetic justice was reserved entirely for Amanda. The exact moment she realized Jamal was going to remain locked in a federal holding cell, her absolute, unwavering loyalty to her husband completely evaporated. She immediately marched into the downtown office of a high-end divorce attorney, fully expecting to file for aggressive spousal support and demand half of Jamal's hidden cryptocurrency assets. She honestly thought she was going to walk away from the smoking wreckage as a wealthy, highly compensated victim. She was absolutely dead wrong. The sharp divorce attorney took one single look at her financial disclosures and practically laughed her right out of his luxurious office. Because Jamal was under an active federal investigation for massive wire fraud and money laundering, the United States Department of Justice had placed an ironclad freeze on every single asset tied to his identity. The fake artificial intelligence business accounts were entirely seized. The offshore digital wallets were successfully tracked and confiscated by federal cyber agents. The luxury Porsche had already been auctioned off by the government to pay direct restitution to First National Bank. Jamal did not have a single verifiable dime to his name, which meant Amanda had absolutely nothing to take. She was legally tethered to a penniless federal inmate, and she did not even have enough liquid cash to pay the basic standard retainer fee required to finalize her own divorce paperwork. The lawyer showed her the door and told her to come back when she could afford his hourly rate. With no verifiable job history, no wealthy tech husband, and no fake miracle baby to leverage for endless family sympathy, Amanda had absolutely no options left. She was forced to pack up her few remaining suitcases of heavily discounted designer clothes and move directly into the tiny rundown apartment with our parents. The three of them were now permanently trapped in a cramped, noisy concrete box. They were forced to look at each other every single day and face the absolute horrific destruction they had caused. There were no more golden children. There were no more tech empires. There was only the freezing cold reality of poverty and the looming shadow of federal sentencing hearings. They had spent my entire life trying to tear me down so they could blindly build Amanda up. They had treated me like a disposable financial stepping stone. But in their greedy, reckless rush to steal my security, they had accidentally built their entire kingdom on quicksand. And now they were all sinking together, completely isolated and utterly broke. I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown Chicago condo. The city stretched out below me, a glittering grid of golden lights and endless possibilities. It was perfectly quiet inside my home. There was no screaming, no manufactured drama, and absolutely no emotional manipulation. The hardwood floors were gleaming and the modern art on the walls belonged entirely to me. Nobody was going to ask me to sell it to fund a fake startup. Nobody was going to demand I leverage my home for a luxury car. For the first time in 34 years, I was breathing clean air. Earlier that afternoon, I had logged into my Experian portal just to check the final status of the federal investigation. The angry red circle that had haunted me 6 months ago was completely gone. In its place was a bright glowing green ring. My credit score was officially back to a flawless 800. The massive $400,000 home equity line of credit had been permanently erased from my financial history as if it had never existed. First National Bank had issued a formal letter of clearance absolving me of any liability. My name was completely clean. But the absolute best piece of news came directly from the senior partners at my accounting firm. My meticulous handling of the bank fraud case had not gone unnoticed. I did not just protect my own identity, I had successfully protected one of the firm's largest corporate clients from a massive financial loss. Thomas Mitchell had personally called the managing director of my firm to commend my ruthless efficiency and airtight investigative skills. Because of that glowing recommendation, the partners called me into the glass boardroom yesterday morning. They did not just offer me a standard end-of-year bonus. They promoted me to Senior Director of Corporate Fraud Investigations, complete with a massive salary increase and my own dedicated team of junior auditors. While my parents and my sister were sitting in a tiny rundown apartment waiting for their federal sentencing dates, I was sitting in a corner office at the very top of the financial world. They had tried to bury me under $500,000 of fraudulent debt so they could build a fake empire. Instead, they accidentally handed me the exact shovel I needed to unearth my own massive success. People often tell you that family is absolutely everything. Society conditions us to believe that blood is thicker than water, and that you must endlessly forgive the people who share your genetic code. But my experience taught me a very different and incredibly harsh truth. Sometimes blood is simply just blood. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are actually the ones holding the knife. Sometimes the family you are born into is nothing more than a heavy iron anchor trying to drag you directly to the bottom of the ocean. Cutting the rope that binds you to toxic people is never an act of cruelty. It is an act of basic survival. When I walked away from my family on that manicured patio, I did not just leave behind a stolen house and a pair of federal criminals. I left behind 34 years of being the designated scapegoat. I left behind the overwhelming burden of trying to earn the love of people who only valued me for my bank account. I finally stopped begging for a seat at their table and decided to build my own. My mother told me at that Thanksgiving dinner that I did not deserve anything. She was right, but not in the way she intended. I did not deserve their constant betrayal. I did not deserve their vicious financial abuse. I deserved absolute peace. I deserve to surround myself with people who respect my boundaries and value my true worth. If you are listening to my story right now, and you are currently suffocating under the heavy weight of a toxic family, I want you to hear this very clearly. You do not owe your abusers your future just because you share a last name. You do not have to set yourself on fire simply to keep them warm. It is okay to walk away. It is okay to choose yourself. Your peace of mind is worth infinitely more than their conditional approval. Let them be angry. Let them call you selfish. Let them drown in the absolute consequences of their own greed. You just keep building your beautiful, quiet life. Thank you so much for following my journey to the very end. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and cut off toxic family members for your own sanity and financial protection? I would love to read your stories and experiences in the comments section below. Let us build a community of survivors who refuse to be manipulated anymore. If this story resonated with you or gave you the courage to stand up for yourself, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and sweet justice. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that they hold the pen to their own life story. Until next time, stay strong, protect your peace, and never let anyone forge your signature on your future. Society often preaches unconditional loyalty to family, framing blood ties as unbreakable bonds that require infinite forgiveness and endless sacrifice. However, the profound lesson learned from this harrowing ordeal is that biology does not grant anyone a free pass to exploit, manipulate, or financially abuse you. For decades, the protagonist was conditioned to believe that establishing boundaries made her the villain, and that yielding to her family demands was the only way to keep the peace. Yet when relatives weaponize guilt to steal your identity and secure their own lavish lifestyles, yielding is no longer keeping the peace. It is actively funding your own destruction. This story reveals that true empowerment comes from recognizing that you are never responsible for saving toxic people from the devastating consequences of their own reckless greed. Letting them face the legal and financial wreckage they created is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. We frequently fear that walking away from our parents or siblings will leave us completely isolated. But the truth is that removing parasitic relationships creates the vital space needed for genuine peace, success, and self-worth to finally flourish. It takes immense courage to stop being the designated safety net for people who would gladly push you off a ledge just to cushion their own fall. Setting a firm boundary, whether it means refusing to pay a fraudulent debt involving the authorities or walking away completely, is the highest form of self-respect. You do not owe your future or your mental health to anyone simply because you share a last name. If you are currently feeling trapped by the toxic expectations of your own relatives, take a deep breath, draw your line in the sand, and share your story of breaking free in the comments below.